Hi everyone, excuse me, it's William back with the Grand Duke Dmitri series. I hope you haven't gotten bored of the topic. I, of course, find it endlessly interesting. And today I'm going to try to get through the final part of Dmitri's letter to his sister that he dated 27th October 1939. And I say I'm going to try because there's a lot to cover, but we'll see. I guess we better dive right in. So the recap for the last little section, well, I primarily just talked about the Nansen passport. So maybe not an exciting topic, but I think a very interesting one. Dmitri was, as he called it, a Nansist. His sister was as well, but she doesn't seem to have considered the obstacles that placed on him as far as traveling both within Europe and then to the United States. I think he could have done it. It was a little bit of an excuse, but anyway, be that as it may, it's an interesting topic. I mentioned yesterday that Wikipedia has a list of famous people who had the Nansen passport, and Maria herself is on it. She also had one, and Dmitri is not on it. Another Romanov who is on it, on this list, that is Princess Vera Konstantinovna, the daughter of Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich. So it made me wonder how many Romanovs did have Nansen passports, and if any of them then took citizenship in other countries, or if they instead, like Dmitri, allowed and desired their children to have citizenship in other countries, but decided not to take it themselves because they didn't want to be a citizen of any country but Russia, their native land. Okay, so that is the recap. Our cast today is huge. It's huge. I'm not going to be able to talk much about people because Dmitri talks about people that were important to himself and Maria in their childhood, the people who were essentially taking care of them and being mentors to them. And then he talks about that in relation to Polly. And he also talks about Audrey and Georgiadze. He mentions a certain Dr. Moinson. I'm not at all certain that he spells that correctly. It's Moinson. And he talks about Dr. Maurer. So we have a combination here of things about the situation with Polly and Audrey on the one hand, and just a little bit about his own medical situation. So, yeah, written in English as before. And yeah, it's a difficult one because there are words that I just couldn't make out. You know, it doesn't matter if he's writing in Russian or in English or in French. There's always words that, you know, are scribbled and that are difficult to make out. So now and then I'm going to say blank, as I've done before, to indicate that there's a word there that I just can't read. Okay, so here we go. Dearest, I know that you understand me. Dearest has an exclamation point after it. I know that you understand me, and I know that you may well understand that all this torments me awfully, especially Polly. Once more, I must repeat, Polly is at home now and not in America without a house at an hotel. Triple exclamation point. It is all very well to say that we, you and me, one day had to part from nannies. Yes, that is true, but we lived in large homes. Double exclamation point. You with Tanya and blank, good or bad, he writes in parentheses. Me with Zhdanov and Laming. Then you had Fräulein Hase, me with Cook or Welter, and all that overplanted by Auntie Ella and Uncle. As was Moscow or Ilinsky, good, and then in parentheses, good, happy, or awful, that has nothing to do with it. Polly's moral Ilinsky, he puts moral in quotation marks, was Beaumesnil. His moral Zhdanov there could easily be Flower, his moral Cook and Welters, Wrangel or Vorontsov, and so on. But Beaumesnil has gone forever, and the tiny house of Nanny must be the Moscow, the blank, the Ilinskaya, everything. Do you see what I mean? Please forgive this outburst, but you see how it all is, especially with Polly. Let us have a look on these two questions. One, Polly going to America from a blank point of view, which has nothing but nothing to do with the war. He underlines that. If Georgiadze could live in France, what would Audrey do? She would stay at the new and beautiful house near Paris or in the other one down at Saint-Tropez. Now that Italy is out of the war, exclamation point, and the question of going to America would simply not arise, underlining and double exclamation point. Polly would be in a home, underlined, and whatever I would do in Europe, I would not be far from him, underlined. In other words, this desire of odds of getting Polly over has nothing to do with the war, but with Georgiadze's police papers, exclamation point. Once more, it's laughable. Double exclamation point. For once in my life, and then he puts in parentheses, thank God, I get this awful thing with my lungs. But if I wish not to be too far from Polly, tuberculosis or no tuberculosis, and before I end my cure, I must go to America? Why? Because Georgiadze can't land in France, and in England, the income tax is awaiting Audrey's pleasure. Laugh, 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 little lady, triple exclamation point. Well, I must end this letter. My hand is blank. I think you will really get it, as a doctor, I don't know him, not one of ours, is leaving on Monday from Italy for New York and will post this letter on blank. Please write, much love and blessings, Dmitri. P.S. I am stronger, I am better, stronger, but it's awfully long, soon 2 months, in a week, that I am in bed. But I am really better. I will do all I can to get the head doctor, Dr. Maurer, to give me his monthly medical report he sent to Moinson about me. You then can see for yourself. Then a little later, is it PPS or PSS? He does it right? Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Allergy attack. He adds this second postscript. I could not get the report, as only doctors may have it. Anyhow, they all say that I am much better, but that I was in a most awful condition. Of course, it's the same old story. The doctors always assure one that everything you do in, and he puts in quotation marks and follows it with ellipses, ... So hard to say what he meant there. Really hard to say. Yes, okay. Oi, 7 minutes. This is tilted. I'm not 7 minutes in going to try to straighten it out, so forgive me for coming at you at a slant. Okay, here we go. Interesting that he says Polly would be living in a hotel in America. I'm not sure I understand why that would be. Really? I guess it must be that Audrey and Georgiadze were living in a hotel at that point. Sure, it wasn't for long. Here he is championing Nanny. Maria, apparently the question of Nanny has arisen, and Maria and Audrey are both of the opinion that Polly at 12 is too old for Nanny. And Dmitri is championing her and seems to think that that arrangement should continue, of him having her taking care of him. So Zhdanov, so these various people, the ones that Dmitri mentions for himself, well, we know Laming, of course, GM George Mikhailovich Laming, who is his primary caregiver. Then Zhdanov is mentioned in a 1908 letter, but I don't really know anything about him. But here Dmitri is crediting him with having been an important person in his life when he was an adolescent, at least. In 1908, he was 17. Maybe a servant, I don't know. Cook is mentioned in 1907, and clearly not a servant. The name is spelled in the English way, C-O-O-K. Some kind of male tutor or, mentor to Dmitri. He's mentioned also in 1915. He was still in Dmitri's life at that time. Welter. If you've listened to the 1906 diary entries, you remember Welter. He was the fun guy. He seems to have been a sort of physical education teacher, and he was the one who would essentially go out and play with Dmitri, build things in the snow and run around and do things like that. So these are the people that Dmitri wants to compare Polly's adult friends isn't the right word, but the people who were involved in his life. So he mentions Wrangel, whom we already know, the man whom Dmitri calls the general, Vladimir Wrangel, and he mentions Flower, which is interesting. Flower was Dmitri's, I believe, his valet, an Englishman, Reginald Flower, his gentleman's gentleman, but apparently Polly was attached to him. And then he mentions the people who were, and Vorontsov, I don't know, the Vorontsovs were one of the families that Dmitri was thinking were saying nasty things about him and behind his back, he's got tuberculosis, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I don't know. The women that he mentions as having been important to Maria in her childhood are largely a mystery to me. Fräulein Hase, that means, if I'm not mistaken, that means hare or rabbit but people can have that last name. So Fräulein Hase, I don't remember her being mentioned elsewhere in anything that I've seen. I'll have to wait for the biography or have to go back to her memoirs, which I don't have with me here, not the childhood, the first volume. Tanya, now that sounds like a servant, but who knows? It's surprising to me that there's no mention of, you will remember from the 1906, 1907 diaries, almost every entry, the reference to this annoying Miss June, Miss Junkovskaya, who was attached to Maria, and both of the children found her tiresome, although I have to say in her favor, I was very impressed that on one occasion in 1907, she was the one who insisted that they stop and help this poor woman when they were in the Crimea, who was laying in a prostrated state along the side of the road, and she ended up being desperately ill, and it was Miss June who insisted that they stop and help her. So good for Miss June. Anyway, it's interesting that again, this reference to things being awful. So him saying to her, it doesn't matter if things were, what does he say exactly? A good, happy, or awful. That has nothing to do with it. So, the inference one can draw from that is that he expected Maria come back and say, well, that was a terrible time in our lives. But, he's saying, of course, that Polly needs at least the familiarity and the stability of this environment that he already has. When he uses the word moral, nравственное in Russian. It can literally be translated moral in the sense of right or wrong. It's immoral or it's moral. But it can also be translated as morale. And at some point, I guess in English, the word was, again, the same word like in Russian, but it was differentiated between moral and morale. And you wouldn't talk about, in English, it makes no sense to say, Wrangel is Polly's moral or morale laming. But I guess a person that makes him feel safe and secure and have a sense of well-being. Okay, interesting about the houses in Paris and Saint-Tropez, which now she could not live in because of this problem with Georgiadze having some kind of reason for not being able to go into France. They wouldn't let him into France, apparently. Italy out of the war. Oh, I should have looked that up. I thought Italy was already in the war, but maybe not. Maybe that came later when Dmitri says that Italy is out of the war. It almost sounds like Italy had declared war and then rescinded it. But anyway, sorry, I didn't look that up. I don't know. For once in my life, thank God, I get this thing with my lungs. Well, that is really a strange way of putting things in English. You would not say, thank God. Oh, I've got tuberculosis, thank God. So I think what he's saying is that he says, for once in my life, and then puts in parentheses, thank God. I think what he's saying is, thank God that, this is the first serious illness I've had. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. So yeah, now he's got this thing with his lungs. He's got chahotka, the Russian word for tuberculosis. He actually uses, I did translate that word. I've got chahotka. And what do you expect of me? You expect me to come to the U.S.? And why do I have to come to the U.S.? It's so unfair. I have to come to the U.S. merely because Audrey has these problems with her husband not being able to enter France and with the income tax in England, and so that's completely unfair. I'm the one who's sick, and I'm the one who has to uproot himself and travel and go to the U.S. where I don't want to be, all because of this situation with Georgiadze. Okay, well. Yeah, I understand him being resentful and bitter. I think he's probably absolutely wrong in saying that the only reason that Audrey wanted Polly to be sent to the U.S. as soon as possible was because, because she couldn't move to France. And the war has nothing to do with it, and he underlines that, well, yeah, come on, the war definitely has. Can you imagine being a mother and your 12-year-old child is in, what looks like it's going to be a war zone? Yeah, no, I think she definitely had that in mind. Okay, so then we find out this, not surprising but interesting thing that Dmitri talks about Dr. Maurer. So Dr. Maurer is compiling a monthly report about Dmitri's health, and he sent it to one of Dmitri's other doctors, but he is not giving it to Dmitri, and he's not going to give it to Maria, because this attitude at that time, a very common attitude among doctors. Doctors are sort of the gods in the medical in the sphere, not only of medicine as a science, but in their patients' lives. And so, patients don't have a right to see these things. It's kept secret from them. And here we see that Dmitri, of course, is already becoming suspicious. He's already starting to be a bit cynical about what's going on, about them telling him that, oh, you're doing great. And he's been in bed for 2 months now, and yeah, he's better, but he's right on the verge of thinking, oh, maybe I'm being strung along a little bit here. So anyway, that interests me. I don't know if it interests any of you. Maurer did end up sending Maria some reports. At some point, Dmitri must have really insisted upon it, or she insisted upon it. And it seems to me, from what I've read elsewhere with Maurer, that, yeah, she was not going to let the matter go. And he wasn't going to have any peace until he allowed that. But anyway, so what do we have next time? Well, we are going back in time. We have a letter that I assume was written toward the mid or beginning of October, probably midway between the one that we had on 23rd September and this one on 27th October. And it touches upon many of the same topics: politics, Dmitri's health, the situation with Polly and Audrey, but it's very interesting. It's such a different mood. So it's more like the mood of the September letter, where he's happy. Well, not happy is the wrong word, but he's feeling good about things. He's feeling optimistic, and nothing's bothering him too much. And it's a shorter letter than either this one that we just finished or the one before, but more interesting details. And so, yeah, I look forward to starting that, and I hope you'll come back for it. I don't know what is bothering the crows, but c'est la vie, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.